On September 18, 2006, a crazed man pushes past a women's shelter employee and gains access to the interior of the shelter. From here, he locates and corners his estranged wife in the kitchen area before pointing a 12-gauge shotgun at her chest and pulling the trigger from point-blank range, killing her almost instantly. Afterwards, he flees in a stolen car, sparking a nationwide manhunt and landing himself on America's Most Wanted fugitive list. Why did this happen? Were there warning signs? And does he get caught? Let's talk about it and do the deep dive. Today's video revolves around a man known as John Woodring. John Woodring was born July 22, 1971, making him 35 years old at the time of this case. Normally with a video like this, I'd like to go back to the beginning. However, with John Woodring, that's not entirely possible, but there are a few things we do know about John Woodring's upbringing and childhood. John's father left the picture entirely before John was ever even born, and John suffered physical abuse at the hands of his mother and her revolving door of boyfriends. At age 11, John was placed in the care of his grandparents after his mother relinquished custody of him. Him and his grandfather became very close, and it almost seemed like his grandfather was filling the void left behind by his dad, who abandoned him. Unfortunately, this wouldn't last too long, as just 2 years later his grandfather would pass away due to unspecified cancer. John blames this event and his abusive upbringing for what he got into next as a teenager and young adult. Unfortunately, John would grow up to be a con man, abuser, and eventual murderer. Throughout his teenage and young adult years, he was charged with underage drinking, assault, disorderly conduct, among other things. Once he graduated from high school in 1989, he decided to join the Marine Corps, where he kept getting into trouble. In 1991, John was only 20 years old. John wanted to get into bars in the area. John couldn't get into bars in the area, so what did he do? He stole another Marine's ID, one who was over 21, and he crudely laminated his own photo over that Marine's photo to get into bars. He was inevitably caught with the crudely crafted military ID, which landed him in military jail for a time. Another event in the same year saw him getting into it with a stripper in a hotel room. Apparently, some type of argument ensued, and the stripper actually ended up pulling a gun on John. While not entirely his fault, it does illustrate John putting himself in some pretty dumb situations. Ben Walker, a Marine who had actually trained alongside John, had this to say about John regarding a physical altercation the two got into. "I even got into a fight with Woody when we were both in Millington, Tennessee for training, before we went to Jacksonville. I think it was over a girl. I'm pretty sure that's why we fought, but all I know is he was super drunk and I was with a girl that he wanted to be with and he went crazy. It wasn't really much of a fight because he kept charging at me and I would just keep pushing him down to the ground. But the thing about it was he just wouldn't stop. This lasted for about 30 minutes and then he finally cooled down. That was until he took a look at himself in a mirror and noticed that his face was all bloody from carpet burns. He got those from when I would throw him to the ground on the carpet. He went crazy again and kept yelling, 'We're not done until I do to you what you did to me.' He once again charged at me and I once again kept throwing him down to the ground for another 30 minutes or so. The next day on base, he was telling me how sorry he was and he was back to normal." These two events illustrate three very prevalent things that will be present from now on and throughout the rest of the case. Number one being John's aggression, number two being his anger over a romantic interest, and number three, the ability to put himself in some really dumb situations. What I'd like to do so you get the full picture of the case and all the context that comes with it, I'd like to quickly go through some red flags present in some of John's former marriages. In 1992, John married his first wife, Lisa Fisher. The pair would stay together until 1997 before she requested a divorce. Not much has been made public about the relationship, but it's after this where some red flags would emerge. Some very, very large red flags. Right after the divorce, John married another woman on a Cherokee reservation. She was a tribe member. Just 1 month later, she filed for a restraining order against John. 1 month. That's all it took. In the restraining order, the woman alleged physical and verbal abuse. John tried to counter this by saying he only did so until she started crying and then he stopped. He also tried to guilt her, saying that he wanted his family together for the upcoming holidays. Despite all of his many objections, the restraining order was granted, and shortly afterwards his wife filed for divorce. But did John give up? No, he was a supreme stalker. So what did John ultimately decide to do? Well, the first thing John did was he took out an ad in a local newspaper. In this ad, he placed a photo of himself next to his soon-to-be ex-wife, and below it he began begging for her to take him back and begging for her forgiveness. He didn't get that. Instead, he got charged with contempt of court for violating the restraining order. Did John learn from this? No, absolutely not, because in March of 1998, he broke into his soon-to-be ex-wife's home, pushed her down onto the bed before delivering a flurry of punches to her face, leaving her bloodied before running off into the night. The assault took place on Indian reservation land, making this a federal crime. John only served 3 days before getting out on bond, and he immediately went back to his soon-to-be ex-wife's home and snuck into a window, and while there he disconnected the telephone cord in front of her. This was in 1998, so that landline phone that John had just disconnected was her only hope in calling for help, and John knew this. He then threatened her, saying he had a gun in the woods and he wasn't afraid to use it. At some point during his tirade, she escaped and went to a neighbor's house where she called the police. John ended up being sentenced to 3 months in a federal detention center, and while serving that sentence, his wife's request for divorce was actually granted. It's here where John's true crime book, A Convict Speaks, comes into play. In it, he spoke on his 3 months in the Asheville detention center. It is that experience that opened his eyes. Woody found himself living with murderers, thieves, rapists, and other violent people. He began to wonder why people like himself and others committed such crimes. He wanted to know what fueled the behavior, and he began to become interested in gaining that knowledge. By the way, that's a direct quote. That's not me, changing the perspective. He was speaking in the third person. After his release, he enrolled in a community college where he obtained 2 different associate's degrees before transferring to West Carolina University. Keeping his trend of quickly marrying women up, he married a woman named Jody Sutton in 1999 and had 2 kids with her. Not much has been made public about this marriage, but given some of John's past actions, we can fill in the blanks. During his marriage to Jody, John began speaking with another woman, 46-year-old Bonnie Mertz, a nurse and mother of 3 who was going through the final stages of divorce. Bonnie was set to receive well over $100,000 in her divorce settlement, which was a fact that John quickly became aware of. Being a scummy con man, he instantly turned the charm on and tried to propose to her, which she denied. She told John she was not ready to jump into a new relationship so quickly after being divorced. Despite this, John would continuously call her and want to see her on a very regular basis, to the point where Bonnie started to feel smothered. When he wasn't trying to spend time with Bonnie, he was indulging in a new hobby that he had picked up, exchanging letters with some of America's most notorious serial killers. He corresponded with David Berkowitz, Eric Rudolph, and Pamela Smart, becoming obsessed with their crimes in the process. Always looking for the next get-rich-quick scheme, John took the unedited letters alongside some of his poorly articulated thoughts and made a book, A Convict Speaks. Being a complete narcissist, John thought he had a home run on his hands. He thought he was going to be receiving all these crazy book deals, all this money. He thought he was going to be rich. He started sending off this crappy manuscript to dozens upon dozens of publishers, many of which he didn't even hear back from, and a few even wrote back critiquing his poor writing. John basically ignored every critique and was still adamant that this book was going to be a smash hit and that all these publishers were basically dumb, so he decided to self-publish. The problem with that was he needed money, and he didn't have any. His solution to this problem was to con his new friend Bonnie Mertz out of $30,000. He did so by telling her, "Hey, I'm going to start a mobile mechanic business. If you give me this money, I'll pay you back with interest." And she did so, unfortunately. By the way, I feel like $30,000 is way too much to self-publish a book. You can let me know if I'm wrong in the comments. I did 5 minutes of research and kind of looked around to see how much it would cost. But anyways, regardless, that 30 grand was now gone. Bonnie would never see that again. That mechanic business would never start up, but the book was ultimately published in February of 2005 to virtually no results at all. Unfortunately, in May of 2005, Bonnie would fall even further into John Woodring's trap by marrying him after many consistent attempts, and they had a honeymoon in Hawaii, which Bonnie paid for. In the months following this honeymoon, Bonnie's family decided to come over and kind of get to know John more, and well, they got to know John. It just wasn't in a good way at all. For some unknown reason, John got into it with Bonnie's daughter's boyfriend and began choking him. When Bonnie's daughter tried to separate the two, John turned to her and headbutted her full force to where she fell on the ground. The police were called, but ultimately no charges were pressed against John. However, this would cause the family to distance themselves from Bonnie, not wanting to put up with John's assholery. And this ultimately seemed to be what John wanted, as he now got to isolate Bonnie even further from friends and family, having her all to himself to manipulate and control. Regardless of how her family felt, their relationship progressed further, with the pair buying a 1,700 square foot house in Sylva, North Carolina for about $140,000 in September of 2005. The couple moved into the home with Bonnie's 13-year-old son, as well as 2 sons that John had from a previous marriage. To help provide, John got a job as a teaching assistant at his former college. While moving into the new home, Bonnie found some old marriage documents from John's marriage to Jody Sutton. Suspicious of his behavior lately, she took these documents to the courthouse, where, to her shock and horror, found that John was still married to this woman. When she confronted John about this, he acted just as surprised as she was and claimed that he thought that the marriage had been annulled long ago. Jody and John would get officially divorced in November of 2005, and despite Bonnie being very pissed, she remarried John 3 months later. Now knowing that they were officially married, John turned his assholery up to 11. He began forging checks in her name, siphoning off child support payments that she was receiving for her 13-year-old, and putting them into all these secret bank accounts, abusing Bonnie, as well as cheating on her. Bonnie discovered the forged checks pretty quickly, as well as some of his secret bank accounts. She also discovered on his MySpace profile, which he left logged in, there were a bunch of swingers messaging him, and they were on his friends list, and she found a bunch of nude photos of John on his computer, and John was exciting himself, so to speak. These discoveries led to multiple arguments between John and Bonnie ended up on the receiving end of verbal and physical abuse for even daring to confront John on the matter, and their relationship deteriorated even further as a result. In March 2006, John was arrested after stealing a check from an elderly woman's mailbox and cashing it after forging her name. He was charged with forgery and common law robbery. From the outside looking in, friends and family suspected Bonnie of taking drugs because her behavior had altered severely for the worse in a matter of months. What they didn't know is that John had been verbally and physically abusing her for months on end at this point. John had successfully isolated Bonnie from her friends and family. He controlled every aspect of her life and was always around 24/7 to watch over her. John's abuse of Bonnie eventually spread to all the kids in the household, including his own. He would frequently slap, yell, cuss at them, beat on them, and on one instance he even stamped his boot down on Bonnie's 13-year-old son and wouldn't stop even after he started crying. As all this was going on, John was going on a spending spree with Bonnie's divorce money, including the $30,000 he initially took from Bonnie before they were married. He bought a Corvette and 2 speedboats, among many other things, totaling out to well over $100,000. He was effectively abusing Bonnie physically, mentally, as well as financially, and Bonnie wanted to escape desperately, but was scared of what John might do as a result. Her credit was ruined, her savings had been totally drained at this point, and she was very angry at herself for remarrying John. She had high hopes that John would eventually start contributing to their joint accounts, but instead John was only interested in draining them, and enough was enough. Bonnie decided she had to do something. And that something was to file a complaint for a domestic violence protective order. In the complaint, she said, "From the beginning, our relationship has been rocky, riddled with jealous rages, intimidation, pushing me down, threatening to kill me if I ever left him anytime we fought over the last year. He degrades and cusses at me and my child. Last July, he assaulted my daughter and her boyfriend visiting from Texas. I am very afraid for myself and my child. He is an ex-Marine and very strong. Yesterday, he was screaming and cussing at children and cussed at me. Children were crying and scared. Approximately 2 weeks ago, he purposefully bruised my son's arm play fighting." In an infuriating result, Jackson County District Judge Danny Davis denied her request, saying that she hadn't proved enough. Her attempt, despite being unsuccessful, did cause John to change his tactics, going from physical assaults to guilt tripping, with him saying that he wanted to crash his Corvette and that if she ever tried to leave him, he would take his speedboat, overdose on pills, and crash it. Bonnie was having none of his guilt tripping, and when he learned that his guilt tripping wasn't working, he reverted back to physical assaults, and in September of 2006, he attacked again, causing Bonnie to file a second complaint for a protective order. "I have been in this relationship for 1+ years, and over the last several months have tried to work on getting out of this abusive relationship, including filing a restraining order before, which was denied. This man has previously been convicted of assault on other wives. 3 weeks ago, when I attempted to leave, he choked me twice and ripped off my necklace and tried to remove my ring. He comes to my work and harasses me even today and keeps tabs on where I am 24/7. It has taken me 3 weeks to safely plan how and when to leave. He uses his strength, build, and marine ways to intimidate me and my son. He has also choked my son. 3 days ago, Woody put his foot on my son's face while he was lying on the ground. Woody states he was playing, but my son was crying. It was obvious that this was upsetting him. I spoke to Woody that this was not playing and hurt the child. Woody states he is such a baby and mama's boy. Woody thinks the roughhousing is normal, but it is distressing to my son. Concerned for my child's safety, this distress caused me to lose my position at work and I had to transfer to another department. He also threatens to kill me if I ever leave him. After this second petition, the protective order was granted. It read, "No contact includes any defendant-initiated contact, direct or indirect, by means such as telephone, personal contact, email, pager, gift-giving, or fax machine." In addition to the court order, a hearing was set for September 19th, 2006. In the meantime, Bonnie and her 13-year-old son were to stay at a local domestic violence shelter. Once she found out that John had been served with a protective order, Bonnie waited for him to leave the house, and upon him doing so, she went inside to collect some of her belongings. This was a ruse on John's part, as she was packing, John kicked in the door and attacked her and started choking her. Her son, seeing this, fled to a neighbor's house where they called the police. The 911 call was never made publicly available, but a small transcript of the call was. "Jackson County 911, do you have an emergency?" "Yes, our neighbors, the Woodrings, up here on Kitchens Branch." "Uh-huh. His son, her son, is down here saying someone is beating his mother. You need to get someone up here." The police arrived just minutes after the phone call ended. Unsurprisingly, John Woodring was nowhere to be found. He had jumped into his truck and backed into the garage, destroying the garage door and fleeing. Bonnie was severely injured from John's attack, having been choked so badly that she required medical attention. An arrest warrant was made up and an APB was put out on John's vehicle. It didn't take long for police to actually find John and pull him over. However, upon being pulled over, he exited the vehicle and escaped on foot. Police were now scrambling to find John Woodring, who they considered extremely dangerous to Bonnie for obvious reasons, as well as the public in general. His vehicles were also seized, but they didn't yield much evidence as to where he could have gone. 4 days after being released from the ER, Bonnie sent the following email to a close family member. "New news. I left Woody, got a restraining order. He violated it by showing up at the house, tried to kill me by choking me, couldn't talk or swallow for 4 days, was in the ER. He committed a felony doing this, not sure right now about moving as I have a lot to settle and press charges and fix the house. He crashed his truck into the garage. We have been in the shelter to keep safe. My son saw it all and called the law from the neighbor's house. I have no phone except work and this new email right now. We'll keep you posted. I am fine, I am strong, do not worry about me too much." Possibly to throw authorities off his trail for extra time, John actually called the Silva Police Department and agreed to turn himself in the following day. Of course, John did not do that and instead began violating the protective order by spamming Bonnie with various emails trying to get her attention. The emails began in the early morning of September 17th, around 7 to 8 a.m., and there are many of them. However, I'm gonna only pick the interesting ones or the ones that are totally relevant to the case. To preface the email I'm about to read off, Bonnie had called John a narcissist during one of their arguments. "This is what you believe I am: behavior or a fantasy of grandiosity, a lack of empathy, and a need to be admired by others. I am not this. I have empathy and I don't look at myself as handsome and unresistible, and I don't believe I am special by any means. Bonnie, I love you. I am just a guy who effed up. I am loving, caring, compassionate, and I go out of my way to make you happy. Please forgive me." Reading through these emails is absolutely nuts. It's wild to me how a guy so delusional can justify his actions and act like he's God's gift and the best husband when we know what he did. Anyways, on to the next email. 5 minutes later. "I was just thinking about something. You know, in the last 2 years, all the places that we have been: Florida, Hawaii, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina. Bonnie, please don't let what I have done throw this away. I love you so very much and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I mean this. I thought I was doing well. I really did. It was the eBay address that triggered this. It had to be. The eBay addresses that John references are to some eBay links to apartments that Bonnie discovered on John's personal computer. It's assumed that John was trying to rent one of these apartments in order to make cheating on Bonnie easier. Backing these assumptions up, John had an account on an adult website where he would reach out to women. One of these women stated that John would sneak women into the family home when Bonnie was out at work. She explained that she exchanged nude photos with John and that John would frequently arouse himself in front of his webcam for her. On one profile, the woman stated that he had photos of himself smiling, standing at full attention, so to speak, behind a nude 20-something woman bent over a bed. On another profile that has been lost to time, it read, "I'm a young man looking for a special woman to get to know and see where things go. I enjoy the outdoors, so on nice days you can find me swimming and boating at the lake." On another adult website involving leather and whips, don't know how much I can say because of YouTube, his profile read, "I am in for anything." He described himself as a dominant male who is actively seeking a submissive woman, a switch woman, or a dominant transsexual. If you're like me, you might have just asked yourself, what is a switch woman? Well, it seems to be a woman that can switch between being the dominant and submissive in a relationship. These profiles and more were very active during his marriage to Bonnie. 4 hours after the eBay-related email, John continued with his barrage of emails to Bonnie. "I had 2 people come out yesterday to fix the garage where I rear-ended it. The wall is back in place. They took the garage door down where I parked. It was rotted anyway, as I recall. It needs the trim put back on in a support block, but it is up and you don't have to get insurance to pay for it. I am sorry I did that and I am sorry I hurt you. I love you so much. I can't believe all of this has happened. Please forgive me." An hour after that, he sent yet another email, this time claiming that he had sold Bonnie's pet for $150. It's not stated what kind of pet this was, more than likely a dog or cat. He offered to drop a check off at her new address, an obvious ruse to learn where she was living at. Bonnie simply sent back, "Have someone drop off money at the front desk, not you." The front desk being at her job, which John already knew the location of. He didn't have anyone drop off any sort of money. Instead, he had flowers sent to Bonnie's work, and attached to the flowers was a video message basically begging for Bonnie back and showing shots from their Hawaii honeymoon. Bonnie was having none of this. She had the flowers returned to the florist, which angered John, and he sent off yet another email stating, "You just cost us $100. You have to let me try, Bonnie." John then got into Bonnie's email, sending her a message from her own email address, pleading with her to take him back. He got no reply. John would send one more email at 9:04 p.m. that day, and this would be the final email he would send. "Bonnie, I wanted to email you this last time. I just spoke with my mother and I need you to know something. I do not blame you at all for how you feel. I don't blame you at all. I will not be trying anymore. I have left you a letter and I will be out of your life forever. I hope you find peace with that. I never wanted this to happen. I have heard some things you told my mom I had done, and I would like you to know that you were getting what people want you to hear. I never cheated on you and I never had any girlfriends while we were married. I think you need to also realize that you didn't have to leave this time. I was towing the line, I really was. However, you will get a letter of last wishes from me, and I just hope that after I am gone we could meet again because you are my soulmate and I truly believe that. I don't expect you to call my cell, but it will be the last chance you have to talk to me. I hope one day you will forgive me, and it might take me leaving to do just that. I love you. Your tattoo on your chest spells it for me. My eternity didn't mean to you what it meant to me. Love, Woody." The last sentence of that email refers to a tattoo that John got. I believe it's of an Asian symbol. I could be wrong. You can let me know in the comments. I'll put it up right here. It has a B in like the lower corner signifying Bonnie, and the symbol itself translates to eternity. Somehow John already knew where Bonnie was staying. At the time, the location of the shelter was kept secret, but many locals still knew where it was. However, he could have learned through Bonnie's emails, mutual friends, any number of things really. 10 minutes after sending his final email, John broke into a house, stealing a 12-gauge shotgun and car keys to a blue 2006 Honda Civic. He then drove the 4 miles to the shelter where Bonnie was staying at. He eventually arrived at the Reach Domestic Violence Shelter where Bonnie was staying, a little brick building obscured by trees around 4 miles away. He got out and made his way toward the entrance, armed with a shotgun. A lot of things had to go wrong for what was about to happen. Typically, police patrol around the general area of the shelter, but this time no patrols were active in the immediate area. The second thing is that reportedly there was a fence around the area, but it had been broken over time and unmaintained, leaving many open sections. Lastly, the building was reported to be very secure, with every window being able to be locked, multiple panic buttons to call law enforcement, and doors that locked behind employees as they left. This latter part would become completely irrelevant though. John ended up catching a female employee as she was leaving for the night, and before the door closed, he kind of pushed her inside and forced his way in. Hearing the commotion, Bonnie came out and to her horror saw John. Feeling that she had to get in between John and this female employee, she bravely put herself in harm's way. This decision would end up costing Bonnie her life. John pushed Bonnie back into the kitchen area of the shelter, effectively cornering her. He aimed his shotgun directly at Bonnie's chest before saying, "You don't want to die, but you're gonna." He then pulled the trigger, shooting Bonnie in the chest at point-blank range. Woodring fled into the night, taking off in the stolen car, while Bonnie's 13-year-old son came out of hiding and held his mother in his arms as she died within mere seconds. Following the shooting, a nationwide alert was issued for John Woodring. At his home, police found a letter to Bonnie, as well as instructions on how to get to the domestic violence shelter she was staying at. There were also notes on Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber who managed to evade law enforcement for around 5 years. The Honda Civic was located about 1 week later at a Greyhound bus station. Eyewitnesses in the area estimated the car had been there for 3 days or so. That's really all they had to go off of, as the surveillance footage in the area was shoddy at best and offered no help. The station's employees could neither confirm or fully deny they sold John a ticket, and this specific station did not keep any sort of passenger log. He quite literally could have been anywhere in the United States at this point. Realizing this fact, authorities charged John with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution and began receiving help from the FBI. The FBI placed John Woodring on their most wanted fugitives list. Meanwhile, Bonnie's daughters were collecting her remains for a funeral that was to be held on September 23rd in Houston. Law enforcement feared that John may have been heading in that direction to potentially attack Bonnie's family. Everyone was on high alert, but luckily John didn't show up and the family was able to put Bonnie to rest at Woodlands North Cemetery in Houston, Texas. Even still, remembering how aggressive and crazy John was, the family lived in fear knowing that John could be anywhere. On the September 30th, 2006 edition of America's Most Wanted, a segment aired about John Woodring. An archived version of their website at the time shows Woodring alongside a detailed information page about him, including his tattoo of Woody Woodpecker and the fact that he changed his name from John to Woody at some point. Still, law enforcement didn't get a whole lot of useful information from the public, despite him being showcased on America's Most Wanted as well as Larry King Live, two giant TV shows in the mid-2000s. 6 weeks into the manhunt, on November 1st, two men were winterizing their houseboat on Fontana Lake, about 50 minutes away from where Bonnie was murdered. One of them noticed a man on their couch, clearly deceased, with a gun in hand and a suicide note nearby. As you may have guessed, this man was John Woody Woodring. John actually owned a houseboat in the same area, a fact that police were aware of. He had managed to stay hidden somewhere nearby, as police had actually been in the area for the past 2 weeks searching for him. Oddly enough, there was no gunshot wound or trauma located anywhere on John's body. Fast forward to 6 months later, and his autopsy results were released. Dr. Cynthia Gardner, the pathologist who performed Woodring's autopsy, said the cause of death in this case ended up being unable to be determined. He had moderate decomposition and severe coronary artery disease. Full toxicology tests were conducted, and all that was found were trace amounts of Valium. According to Dr. Gardner, Woodring's coronary artery disease was so severe that it alone could have been the cause of death, but she felt she could not list that as the official cause. Therefore, the official cause of death was ruled undetermined. In light of the circumstances, the possibility of suicide, and the case background, I signed it undetermined. There was no trauma whatsoever to the body. What could have happened is he could have ingested something that did not get picked up in any of our screenings, but we did a very broad screening, so it would have had to have been something very unusual. The reason everything took so long was because we kept going back to the toxicology tests, because that is where we thought the answer was going to be. We pretty much exhausted everything we could do. Michelle, one of Bonnie's daughters, reacted to his death being ruled undetermined. Undetermined? Why didn't he die of heart disease before he killed my mom? As these events came to a close, the police finally released Bonnie's house to Bonnie's family. And what they found inside was pure ridiculousness. Inside the home, the family found the house barely reflected that anyone but John had ever lived there. Inside, John's narcissism was on full display. Photos of John littered the house. Not family photos either, just photos of John. By himself. The family eventually brought a lawsuit onto the Reach shelter wanting $75,000 in damages. As a result, the willful, wanton, reckless, grossly negligent, and/or negligent acts of Reach permitted a condition to exist on the property which posed an unreasonable risk of harm to people like Bonnie Woodring. President of Reach at the time stated, "I think everyone will see that the organization did all it possibly could do to protect Bonnie Woodring and has no liability." On March 13, 2008, about 1.5 years after the murder took place, there was a development in the lawsuit against the Reach shelter. In it alleges that despite early investigator reports that John forced his way into the shelter to get to Bonnie, it was actually a negligent employee that left the back door unlocked, allowing John to waltz right in the door. To be clear, Woody did not shoulder or force his way into the building, the lawsuit states. He did not try to climb through a window. He did not kick the door down. He simply opened the door that the employee had intentionally left unlocked. The employee, who is not named in the suit, said the door was left open for another reach worker who was expected to come over to the shelter that night. The other employee had already left the shelter and maintains that he/she would never expect the door to the shelter to be unlocked, the suit says. On the back end of that same year, the lawsuit was dismissed with the Reach shelter deemed as not being responsible for the murder. The family appealed that, but that too was denied in December of 2008. Bonnie Woodring impressed those who knew her with her determination not to live in fear despite having every reason to. In the face of death, she stood up to her abuser in order to save someone else's life. She was a loving mother to her children and is dearly missed by her friends and family. That was the case of John Woody Woodring and, quite frankly, his narcissism. It's shocking how obsessed John was with Bonnie. Not only that, but somehow seeing himself as a good husband in his twisted head despite stealing from her, beating on her, giving death threats, beating on her child, verbally abusing her, cheating on her, and harassing her at work. It truly does boggle the mind. If you enjoyed the case, leave a like below. I do one of these every week, or at least I'm going to try to, so if that's something you're interested in, I'd really appreciate your subscription. It would help me out a ton. Thank you so much for watching this far, I really do appreciate it. Peace.